So what's the other bad? Well, there's bad attitude. Sometimes the officer doesn't like the person's attitude. See, officers kind of like being in control. They kind of like being able to give orders. They like being able to pull people over and write them tickets and the person saying, "Thank you, officer," at the end. They like being able to hand the ticket book to the person, say, "Sign there," and then if the person's trying to read what they're saying, they say, "Just sign it," and the person just signs it. They kind of like having that authority, and you can't really blame them. Look, they're human beings. It's kind of a heady thing. You're almost godlike in your ability to sort of dictate people's lives. There must be a tremendous sense of empowerment, and some officers can handle it and some handle it less well. So what happens if somebody does something that kind of changes that dynamic? What happens if a person sees an officer writing a bunch of tickets on the street because the officer doesn't like the party that's going on, but she doesn't know how to shut it down, so she just figures, I'm going to start writing a bunch of bogus parking tickets. Then the people in the party are going to freak out and they're all going to move their cars to another neighborhood and problem solved. I'm not saying this has necessarily happened, but I'm not saying it didn't. So let's suppose a young lady comes out and says, exercising her First Amendment rights to petition government, you're entitled to tell the government that they're messing up. Says to this officer, "Officer, you can't be doing that. That's use of a harsh word." Young lady might just get arrested. If there's alcohol in her breath, she's probably going to be arrested for drunk in public, whether she's drunk or not. But if there's no alcohol, then probably obstructing, resisting, and delaying an officer is a useful alternative for the officer's perspective. Or, let's say that you're a young man and your significant other, you're really fed up with their BS, and you call the officer, tipsy, and demand that the officer tell the person to leave, and the officer says no. Well, okay, the officer's right. The officer doesn't have to enter into your domestic relationship and start being sort of a mobile family law judge. Sometimes they do it, but they don't have to. Probably shouldn't. But let's just say this person has been drinking just enough so that they're on their front yard, they feel empowered to use the S word. And when I say S word, I mean sue. In other words, let's just say that this person says, "Well, officer, I'm going to sue you because you're not doing your job." I'm not saying this necessarily happened, but I'm not saying it necessarily didn't. Well, the person very well might end up being arrested. Probably the officer would just say, "Well, I'm sorry you feel that way. Have a nice night." But if the officer doesn't like sort of this reversal, instead of him ordering people around, the person is saying that he's going to sue him. Again, remember the First Amendment, you have the right to petition government. Well, then that young man just might end up getting arrested. So, look, I've been a prosecutor. I started out my criminal law career in the district attorney's office in another county than I am now. And, then I moved to another county and I did the same thing. And I like officers. I like a lot of them. A lot of them are real decent Joes. I like to talk to the court officers. Some of those guys are real smart. Some of my training as a lawyer, some of the valuable stuff I learned as a young attorney came from an old court officer. They don't like being called bailiffs if they're deputy sheriff. An old court officer who'd been doing it for years and really knew a lot about courtrooms and persuasion. I used to listen to him. He wasn't the principal mentor I had. I don't want to over-romanticize it, but he was a sharp dude and I liked him a lot. If all officers were like him, there wouldn't be any problems with false arrests. But not every officer is like him. I remember in my first job as a district attorney, somebody took me aside and said, "Look, every department needs an animal." What do you mean? What's an animal? An animal is the officer who goes in there and he doesn't necessarily follow the peace officer's standards and training guidelines in his use of force. And as soon as he shows up, everybody gets in the line because nobody wants to get injured. Okay, they'll tell you this and they'll say, but by the way, and this was like 30 or 40 years ago, I'm not going to do the math right now, but they'll say, the thing is that every so often you're going to be sitting at the desk filing cases for misdemeanor crimes against peace officers or whatever else comes in, but if you see a case with this officer's name on it, don't file it because he probably injured somebody without a particularly lawful reason, and we don't want to get embarrassed in court. Now, that was 35, 40 years ago. I don't know if people say that anymore because I just see too many cases where people have a history of violence that's known to the deputy district attorneys, and the cases get filed against some citizen anyway. The difference between law practice now and law practice way back when, at least according to this old coot's observations. So I guess the takeaway from this is that sometimes, if you're arrested for one of these offenses, you should probably seriously think about cutting your losses and taking a deal and getting the best deal you can, but taking a deal. But sometimes somebody may tell you, look, I may have done some bad stuff, but I sure didn't do what the officer said. And you're going to be in a better position than I am to say whether they're telling you the truth or not, but you know what, they might just be telling you the truth. And no matter who you are, it could happen to you too. Could happen to me. Could happen to anybody I know.